Welcome to the Surrogate's Corner with James Mahan.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Surrogate's Corner. I am your host, James Mahan, founder and CEO at the Surrogate's Corner. Today, we have the amazing experience to have Arianna Shelter joining us from International Surrogacy Center. She is the CEO there and has had a breadth of experience in the surrogacy industry. And today, we're going to be talking about unpacking the agency's role in a surrogacy journey, kind of figuring out what exactly does an agency do? How does it work for you as a surrogate? What things should you expect them to do? And just kind of a good grasp on just what surrogacy agencies are doing for us currently. So Arianna, thank you for joining us. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
And so Arianna, I know that you have a kind of unique experience in terms of getting into surrogacy, having been a gestational carer yourself, and then kind of working your way through this particular agency that you're now the CEO of. Can you just briefly explain to our audience kind of how you got into this field, what that journey's looked like for you, and kind of a little bit about your current role?
Yeah, I love hearing everybody's stories because it's a little bit different of how people got in the field. So I was a surrogate. She is 10 now. She just turned 10. So I started my journey about 12 years ago. We had a really long, arduous journey. Took 6 cycles, 4 transfers, had a miscarriage in D&C, finally got pregnant, and then I had extreme medical complications. So I had really bad hyperemesis gravidarum, was hospitalized, sent home on a IV line and a medication pump in my stomach. Finally got better, then had preterm labor. I mean, I went through the ringer medically.
Everything that could go wrong or could go problematic for you. You see it all personally.
Yeah, but thank goodness I had a great relationship with my intended parents. Like, we were solid, so that made all the difference. So afterwards, I really wanted to do surrogacy again, but I just knew that I couldn't, right? It's not a good choice for me, for my family, for whatever family I would be helping. So, I was thinking, how do I still be a part of this beautiful community and help out? And so I said, okay, I'm going to work at an agency, do whatever I can and get in. So how I found International Surrogacy Center is a really funny story. It's for another time. It's kind of long. It involves Craigslist. Back when Craigslist was not so sketchy.
Yeah, it was a thing. Yeah, matches happened on Craigslist at one
point. But I started at International Surrogacy Center about a decade ago as a case manager. And over the years, kind of did every role in the company as we grew. We started with, there's 4 employees when I started. So I was director of case management, and then I did intake and matching, and then directed that, and then kind of made some new roles like social media and marketing, and helped with accounting and all the things. And then I was agency director for a while, and the owners approached me and said, hey, let's have a long-term plan to train you up over several years with the goal of taking over as CEO when they were ready to kind of pull back. And so that was great. I was able to be mentored into the role over several years, which was just wonderful, wonderful mentors I had. And I still don't know what I'm doing, but I do the best that I can. And I think that's what matters.
Right. So sometimes learning on the fly is exactly what you're supposed to do.
Exactly.
I love your background because it's so nice to have somebody in your role currently who has seen all those kind of intermediate steps along the way of what the agency does, right? So you've been there kind of at the intake, managing cases, agency director, and now CEO. One of the questions I always kind of get in my own head is there are a lot of agencies out there. There's a lot of recruiting that goes on. What does your experience look like in terms of what are you looking for in surrogate candidates? When you recruit for them or are searching for potential matches, what things at the very beginning kind of speak to you as this is, what we're looking for? And then the flip side, what things are kind of the red flags, the herring saying we should watch out for these when it comes to matching?
Such a great question. And I think every agency will give you a different answer, right? And that's a good thing because every agency is a little bit different and they have a different, feel and vibe. So for us, it's really important that we feel that there's honesty. So everybody has something in their medical records or maybe in their history. We all have things, right? And so the most important thing for me in the beginning is feeling like she is willing to work with us and be honest, like fully disclose every little thing. And we're usually able to work with those things. What's really challenging for us is when we feel like someone's not being forthcoming with information or intentionally withholding something. And then something comes up in maybe their background check report or, some huge thing pops up in their medical records. And it's just challenging because I feel like you're starting the journey with a layer of trust that's not very solid. So that would be a very important one for me. Obviously, the biggest DQ would be you need a uterus. So believe it or not, we have had people reach out that don't have a uterus. And so, it's just kind of funny. We joke about that internally of just
I would assume there'd be sort of the generic medical disqualifiers, of which I would lump that into a generic medical disqualifier. But
yeah, so we follow ASRM and SEED standards, which are wonderful, wonderful standards. They really help, I think, guide agencies on what's best practices here. Yes, you could take the surrogate And
Mhm.
yes, you could match her and have a journey, but are these type of matches causing the issues that we see when cases go south, right?
Right.
So best practices, and we're continually growing as an industry and as agencies, we help each other out. So I think as time goes by, we're getting better on how can we, um, thoroughly screen both parties, but in a way that's not just benefiting the agency, but that's benefiting both of them, the intended parents and
Right.
the surrogate,
The
with the
eventual
goal.
match, right? That it's going to
Yeah,
be successful or hopefully successful, or not have things that are kind of predetermined to be problematic potentially for
yeah,
us.
absolutely.
It sounds like, at least at the initial level, some of that stuff's going to be like the big picture, boxes are checked or not checked, what they need to do to get in there. But I would assume that you can't kind of screen for all those things at the outset. So
Yeah.
when a surrogate kind of says, hey, I meet all the baseline criteria, I would like to look at moving forward, then what does the agency do as part of that pre-match screening or vetting? Is that where medical clearance comes in? Is it stuff that the agency does on their own? What does that kind of process look like?
You're going to hear me say a lot that every agency is a little different, but I would say most agencies start by meeting the surrogate, either doing a phone call or a Zoom to get to know her and ask some questions, answer questions she has about surrogacy, about the agency. It's a lot of educational information at first. So first is just vetting out whether she wants to do this or not, because she
Mhm.
might not understand what surrogacy is
What
right
it
after.
actually means, or yeah.
Right. So first it's educating her a little bit. It's answering the questions she has, which are all valid. It's really good to just spend time answering questions, not rush her through the process. So if she's still interested after that point, for our agency, we have her fill out a really thorough application. Like it's probably 20 pages long, which
Okay.
I would assume feels like overkill when it's you filling it out.
Yeah.
But as an intended parent and as the attorney and as the clinics know, it's really important to have all the detailed information because it just makes this journey go that much smoother. So she fills out the application, and then usually the agency will look through the application and see if there's anything that they need to discuss further with the surrogate. For example, if something popped up, she answers yes to a medical issue. Okay, well,
Right.
maybe we need to explore that with her first before we do anything else. And then if things are still looking good, then every agency does it a little bit different on the steps of things, but that's usually when screenings come into place as far as criminal background checks. So we do a comprehensive, so criminal screenings, bankruptcy, driving record, that sort of thing,
Okay.
financial checks. Then they also do a mental health screening with a surrogacy professional. So it's either a therapist or a psychologist that is trained and experienced specifically in surrogacy. So
Right.
they follow also the ASRM guidelines and SEED standards. And so they're meeting with the surrogate to see, is this a good point in her life that it's good for her and her family? Does she feel like she understands what she's getting into? Because it's really important to make sure she knows what she's getting into. This is a
Mhm.
big thing. So she does those screenings. And then some agencies will do like a medical screening, before they get to the clinic. So for us, we request all of her medical records. So it's pretty typical. You request every pregnancy, OB, and delivery record. If
Mhm.
she's been a surrogate before, you request IVF records. Sometimes if she needs some kind of clearance from a specialist doctor because she has something.
Oh, an
um,
issue or something in the past, or some medical kind of thing that's been maybe looked at before, but it is sort of a known entity or known quantity for us moving forward.
Yeah, and they're usually not disqualifiers. This is where I think a lot of surrogates get nervous because they're like,
Mhm.
"Oh my gosh, they're gonna get my medical records, and I had thyroid medication when I was,
Right.
whatever."
Mhm.
But a lot of times, it's us just telling the surrogate upfront, "Don't be nervous. Just tell us
Mhm.
everything, and we're gonna work through things because when we see it, we can guide you on, okay, go speak with your endocrinologist and see if this is a good thing for you because of your thyroid history, and they'll say yes or no."
Mhm.
So we have a third party surrogacy company review medical records. So their experience, they have nurses
Okay.
review the medical records and kind of give a general guideline of does she meet the ASRM, standards. And then if all of those things check out and she still likes us and, is happy to move forward, then that's kind of when we say, all right, let's start exploring a match. Being that we have your records, everything looks good. We've done all your screenings, your criminal background check, your psychological screenings, you met with the agency, you're still excited. We have, figured out what her compensation, her benefit package is.
Okay.
And then at that point is when we start looking for a match for her.
Mhm.
I know you talked about medical screening, that sort of thing. So that usually happens after they match with an intended parent. So
Okay.
every intended parent, as you know, will be coming with their own IVF clinic. So
Record position, sure. Okay.
yeah, and every IVF clinic has their own screening guidelines as well, based
Mhm.
on what they've seen with their cases and their history. And even sometimes IVF doctors within the same clinic will have different guidelines.
Right.
So we don't have her records reviewed by the specific clinic until we know which doctor the IPs are with.
Sure.
So if she
Okay.
matches with intended parents at this clinic, then we send her medical records to that IVF clinic to review officially to say, is she a good fit for these specific intended parents.
Mhm.
The clinic will know they only have one embryo, right? That's an important factor that might vary what their decision is. So they're looking at her records in conjunction with that specific match. And then at the same time, usually the agency is trying to get the parties to meet for like a match meeting is usually what it's called, to see if the parties like each other, if they feel like they're a good fit, if they agree on all the big important things along the journey, which as an attorney is so important.
Yes, you always want to have those conversations pre-contract, ideally, before you start dealing with them in the middle of the contract.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So vetting that out and just truly seeing, is this a good fit for both of them, for themselves? And as an agency, do we feel like this is a solid match that will have odds of a good chance of success, and not going south, right? And usually if you align on those big things and everybody's open with communication and they align, then it's a good sign that the match will move forward. So then once medical records are approved, that's when the surrogate needs to go in person for the more official medical screening appointment. So
Okay. That's typically we call your in-person medical screening, like with the specific IVF clinic and the physician who is kind of being brought in with the intended parents. So even if they've done all this stuff, which, based off of what you said, there can be a lengthy, screening process from, I think I want to do this, let's go, to, okay, well, we have to get everything done before we can actually even think about matching you and then getting you signed up with this particular set of parents to move down that realm. Before you get into the medical screening in person, or not quickly, at the matching phase, have you seen it where the surrogates get to have a role in who they get matched with? Do they have preferences? Do they kind of help narrow down the field of potential prospective intended parents that you guys look at, or what is their kind of role in that matching process? That works with the agency?
For us, it's extremely important that the surrogate is very, very involved, right? She needs to have choice in this. This is her body. This is a long term commitment. This is dangerous for her. There's a lot of risk that comes into play here. And so it's really important that she's actively involved with choosing her intended parents. And again, every agency does it differently. For us, if we have intended parents that we feel like are a good fit, right? We're looking at the intended parents, we're looking at the surrogate, and if they align on the big things and what each other are looking for, then we would present the profile to the surrogate to say, hey, here's some intended parents. What do you think? And nobody is ever forced into anything. We want honest opinions. If she's like,
Okay.
I'm not feeling it, that's not a problem at all, right? A good agency is not going to push you on anybody, and they're going to say, okay, that's not a problem. Let's just look for another one. But some of the things that surrogates are looking for that need to align are they hoping to have an intended parent that's local to them, that's close by, or are they okay with IPs in another country, right? That's going to be a different dynamic along the journey. What if there's a language barrier? Is that okay? Or, do you want someone who speaks English? How many embryos are you planning to transfer? More and more clinics only allow single embryo transfers. And so that's important. If the surrogate says, well, I'm only okay with a single embryo transfer, and these intended parents are looking for a double embryo transfer,
Right.
that's automatically not a good match.
Let's not do that.
And then, so many factors like that, as far as, are they married? Are they single? Are they gay? Are they straight? So there's so many factors. And we ask the intended parents those questions and the surrogate as well, right?
Okay.
So off the bat, we never want to try to even have someone meet that doesn't align on those big things, right? That is just an automatic, don't go there. It's just going to break hearts. It's not good for anybody.
Okay. So in that matching phase, it sounds like, you have a good idea of what the surrogate hopefully is looking for. You also have kind of independently what the IPs are looking for. And then your team kind of cross-references those and says, hey, we've got an 80% match or a 90% match. Like, this probably could work. And then the surrogate gets to have maybe the first take at, here's one, would this work for you? Or here's a couple or whatever else. And then we can kind of work through yes on one side, yes on the other side. And then we get to like the match meeting and that kind of deal.
Yeah, for us, we actually do it other way. And I think I misspoke, earlier. So we have the intended parents look at the surrogate's profile first, because I think it saves a lot of heartbreak, right? It's more likely that an intended parent is not going to choose a surrogate profile than a surrogate won't choose an intended parent profile. So it's terrible if you're like, hey, here's intended parents for you. And she's like, yes. And then we're like, oh, they said no. That's kind of heartbreaking. So we usually start with deference to the intended parents. And then if they say yes, that she feels like a good fit, then we send their profile to the surrogate and say, hey, there's some interest here. What do you think? So that's kind of how we do it.
Okay. And then so once they have an alignment of, here's our prospective IP, we're kind of moving forward. that's when the in-person medical screening or like that next step of like, we think this is going to work. Let's make sure the doctors think so. Is there, I know you mentioned that, your team collects a lot of the pre-existing medical records information that the clinic will then look at. Is there any interaction between your agency and these IVF clinics as to what they're looking for? I've always been surprised, like the number of, like you said, even within the same clinic, physicians who have very different kind of criteria they're looking for to clear a surrogate. And I just wondered, like, do you guys take that into account before we send surrogates to clinics that maybe are more particular or looking for certain things or don't like certain things?
Yeah, I think that's really important because if you know this clinic won't approve a surrogate that has, X in her records, you shouldn't really be trying to present the surrogate with intended parents that are at that clinic.
Right.
So for us, we have long-term relationships with, all the clinics. And so we know kind of over the years, what are their guidelines. As they change, they usually let us know, hey, we just updated. Now it's this that we've changed. Maybe the BMI requirement has changed, or maybe the age limit has changed. So we try to stay in touch with the IVF clinics really closely to understand what their general guidelines are. And if we're ever not sure, we just ask them. It's not harm to just shoot an email and say, hey, she has this. What do you guys think about that? Before you get too far in the process, sometimes just shooting a quick email can save so much heartache, because then they match they meet each other, they're sending the records, and then they're like more connected. And then you find out the clinic won't accept her.
Right.
Challenging. So
I feel like I hear from a number of surrogates, like, I'm going for my in-person medical screening. Like, are they going to take me? What are they looking for? And I always feel bad. Like, it's like, I have a hard enough time with the law side of it. Like, I don't get into the medical side, but I have seen that it's not always, the basic ASRM guidelines that, if you meet those big wickets, then it's kind of doctor preference at that point. And I do know that, some have those kind of weird quirks and I don't see them enough on my side, but that's great to know that your team is at least figuring that out, developing those relationships so that we're not sending surrogates, all excited about the match, it's ready to go. And like, oh, I can't change like an immutable characteristic that I have that's in my record that's not going to go anywhere. And they won't take me because of that. So that's very comforting to know that at least that's kind of being thought about in the matching process with you guys.
You don't want to get someone excited about a potential match and then just, already know it's not going to work out, right? It's just not fair to either party. So yes, we are in touch with the clinic pretty much right away. If we do know that she generally meets their requirements, then we would send her medical records. We would have them do a match meeting. If medical records are approved and they meet each other, they still want to move forward, that's when we would get her for her in-person medical screening appointment. To your point on, surrogates being nervous about being disqualified, I felt that when I was a surrogate, right? When I'm applying, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're getting my medical records. I had some nausea when I was pregnant with my daughter. Is that going to disqualify me, right? There's a lot of anxiety there. So I think it's really important that agencies are forthcoming with the surrogate of, hey, don't be nervous here. We're going to tell you all the things as we go. And just kind of give some reassurance there because I think it can really cause a lot of anxiety for surrogates. But I would say I see most surrogates not qualified to move forward from the medical records review with the clinic, not from the in-person medical screening appointment. Because usually if a clinic has looked through her records, they know everything about her that would probably affect her doing a surrogacy. And if they say, yes, this is approved, this is good to go, let's bring her in for a medical screening appointment, I would say probably less than 5% of the time, I'm seeing a surrogate not being qualified to move forward after.
So at that point, it's more like a confirmation or an affirmation of what they thought before when they went through the records, and the in-person is just like, yes, everything kind of checks out.
Yeah, the in-person, they're doing an evaluation of her uterus. So they're seeing, okay, she had her own pregnancies, but what does it look like now? Does she have polyps? Does she have any scarring, adhesions, something that would be contraindicated to IVF in specific? They'll do labs on her. If she has a partner, they'll do labs on her partner to check for infectious diseases and STDs, and so those are the things that could cause disqualifications. Usually what I've seen on disqualifications, like hard ones for medical screening, is when there's an issue with the uterus, right? That's not solvable. Right? If she has a bicornuate uterus that was not in her records and they find it, but sometimes she comes back and they're like, you need a chicken pox vaccine because you're not immune. That's fixable, right?
And the Hep B's, a kind of other random ones, like you seem to have immunities or not, and we need to figure that out. So those kind of little sort of, I won't call them upkeeps, but kind of little things that they do to sort of get going. As we kind of get towards the end here, I know some of the questions I just have in general for you are, what do you think makes for good journeys, like at least at this pre-stage, getting to the contract? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of preferences that we identify early on that hopefully settle the issue on a lot of those big potential things that might come up. But are there any other kind of either intangibles or things that you see that surrogates can either do or be coached on to kind of make for a successful journey or a happy journey for everybody?
Yeah, I would say before you start with an agency, speak with several, because there's some wonderful, wonderful agencies, but they're all a little different, right? So I think it's important for the surrogate to find an agency that fits what she's looking for on her journey. Some agencies are really, hand-holding you every step of the way. They're talking with you weekly, and some surrogates might not like that. But some surrogates feel like, okay, well, if my agency is not doing that, I feel left on my own, and I don't want to be left on my own. So it's important to really speak with the agency to find the one that feels right. And the agency is going to make sure you have a good care team, right? So the agency is experienced with this IVF clinic, with the attorney that the intended parents are working with the attorney the surrogate will choose, right? So having a good care team makes all the difference, especially if those, I say care team, especially if those professionals work together, right, over time, right? Do we have experience working with that clinic for 10 years? That's helpful versus, okay, we've never worked with this clinic before, which can cause some random things to pop up that are stressful for both parties. So I would say that's really helpful. And then just really open communication. Just be open on everything and frequently from the very beginning, before there's issues. Be open with your intended parents, with your agency. That way, when things are starting to pop up that are a little challenging, it's not weird to just start communicating and, start this relationship that can kind of escalate. So communicate frequently and early.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice, because I feel like a lot of times surrogates might look at all agencies as kind of one ubiquitous and the same. Like they're not homogeneous. Like they have different, types of IPs they cater to, or different kind of journeys they want to work towards. And knowing kind of what you're getting to will certainly help with that. And I love the part about communication, because on my side with legal, I always tell people, like, they come to me with an issue, this is going on, no one's helping. It's like, have you told anybody yet? And a lot of times they'll be like, no, I haven't heard from my agency in weeks, or the IPs don't talk to me and I don't know what's going on. And I'm always surprised, like, I'm happy to help and I love being involved in that. But at the same time, it's like, if that communication were there at the beginning, my guess is, 60, 70, 80% of these issues would never get to me, because they would be handled sort of at the agency level as they're starting, not when they become big problems.
Well, and look, let's be real. If someone sees an attorney saying, hey, there's an issue here, immediately you're on guard.
Yes. And everything's like,
Yeah. So
right times, like if I have to send this, it's going to come across more harsh or more abrasive. Not because I'm a harsh and abrasive person. I guarantee you I'm not. But as soon as it's got Esquire or attorney, I'm talking to my attorney, everyone gets a little bit, on edge. And I always say, like, have you talked to the agency first? I would start there. See if maybe this is smaller than we think. If not, come back to me and we can kind of figure that out.
Yeah. And a reputable agency will probably come to you before the surrogate or intended parents do, right? Because they'll notice, hey, we've looked at this and we don't feel like we're the most equipped to solve this. But I always say, like, the agency should be the first line of defense there. When something is getting a little prickly or complicated, the agency should step back and say, okay, objectively, is this a black and white situation? Okay, let's deal with that. If it's not, and most things are not black and white, what is the best thing we could do for both parties, right? What is the thing we could do that will de-escalate the situation and not escalate the situation? So that's always how we look at it. Which professional is the most equipped to smoothly handle this? Is it a medical thing? Well, it's the clinic. Is it something that's legal? Well, is it something that we could just quickly answer and then everybody understands? Or is it something that the attorney should explain because it's a contract and we don't want to misinterpret, right? So I think it's really just pulling back and thinking of the benefit to both parties with the goal of de-escalating the situation.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that. We've been talking a lot about disputes, and we're actually going to do that in our next episode as well. In terms of what does a contract do? How does it look in terms of if you have to go to legal to do those things, and what our wheelhouse really should be. But it's nice to hear kind of what hopefully is happening before the surrogates come, to us, asking us for us to help fix things. If there is that team in place that kind of knows the journey, knows, and is part of that process all the way through, that can help do that at the outset. Arianna, that's amazing and awesome information for us. I truly appreciate it for our audience and for the surrogates and listen and everyone else in the industry. I would love to have you back to discuss other things that agencies do, things about disputes, other things that might be, also relevant of just the agency role kind of as we go through the journey. But for the time being, thank you very much for your time and for joining us today. And thank you everyone else for watching. Please tune in at the Surrogates Corner. Leave us questions. Feel free to post stuff. We're happy to get intake or input as to what kind of other episodes you guys would like to see. So until next time, thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.